Hello, everyone. We're here today with Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas Rushkoff is the author of a number of books about culture and technology and society. We're super excited to have him with us today, and we're going to do a quick fireside chat about the future of pretty much everything, I think. So thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's a fun topic.
Yeah. So you have been involved in technology and culture for a long time. When you started to see the web and how it started, what were you thinking? What was the mood like at that time?
Well, it's funny when I saw the web starting, the mood at that time among the sort of counterculture types was, uh-oh, they're going to replace the internet with the web. So the internet felt like this very peer-to-peer, open, uh, 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 interactive universe, and the web to us looked like, oh, now they're going to replace the internet with television. So instead of really typing everything, going back and forth, and everything being a communication, now they're going to be these people who kind of look at your stuff and click on it, and you won't know if they're going to see it or not. It seemed like the web was what happens if you don't follow Ted Nelson's initial vision of a two-way linked internet. You're going to end up, I don't know who's looking at my stuff. I don't know what value I'm creating for anybody else. It's going to get really one way really fast. And it sure did.
So for those not in the know, the difference between the internet and the web is
Well, the web is one interface for being on the web, for being on the net. So the internet was really just a way for all different computers all over the place to talk to each other through intermediate servers. So you had different ways. We had, so there might be files on your computer that I want to see. So I would use an internet app called FTP, File Transfer Protocol, to kind of log sort of into your computer and get the files that you've partitioned in a public area for anybody who has the FTP to get. It's sort of like Dropbox everywhere. So there were all these different ways of kind of doing Dropbox. And then the web came along and it's like, oh, what if we do Dropbox really visually? So instead of just having your stuff in files, you're going to have this page with pictures that are linked to files. So if you want to read a book, instead of doing an FTP for the book, now you're going to see a picture of the book and you'll click on it. And then that's going to automatically just download this file that then you're going to read on your computer. So it was just that, a really easy way to do access of files. It was like the web to the internet was like Windows to DOS, or the Mac to DOS. So it was like, oh, here's this visual way to do it. But then it kind of became the net itself. It's the only internet that now that most people even know about. And the interesting thing about it is, when we talk about the net, when we were first doing the internet, we weren't thinking about money at all. But before the web, you weren't allowed to do anything profitable online. I mean, it was all nonprofit. It was all educational. You had to sign an agreement saying, I'm only going to go there for research purposes. And then once we had the web, those things kind of loosened, and it was like, oh, well, maybe we could set up a storefront or a shopping mall or this or that. But as this day is about, we ended up trying to use traditional monopoly currencies and banking on this very non-traditional peer-to-peer real-time network. And the two just don't match, right? So what we're in the process of now is looking at, wow, is there a form of currency or monetary exchange that could be as superfluid really as the original internet, where it's on the net? We used to talk about just prana, going back and forth between people. When you were on a bulletin board, and someone's like mother has cancer, you send beams, here's beams, and you just wrote the word beams and it meant you're sending like love to them. And there was this sense that we were all part of this neural networky thing. And then the web felt very opaque compared to that, because you're looking at a picture rather than some active person typing in an IRC channel. It's like how live it is when you're on Signal with somebody and your messages are going back and forth and they cross over each other. It's a stream, or Twitter is a real stream. The web is really kind of still compared to that. But the question was there a form of money that isn't something you're going to borrow from a bank and put in an account and then do a specific transfer to do? That made sense in the old days when the web or the net was something that you logged onto. All right, now I'm going to log on the web and I'll go in my wallet and go do this thing. When we're in a real-time, always on Internet of Things, constant flow, then what kind of money? How do we develop a money that has an equal viscosity to the kinds of interactions we're having? And that, I think, it looks to me that's what the new currencies, microtransactions, and what things like Coil are trying to address.
Mm-hmm. And when we look at the internet was just a series of protocols, right? You had FTP, you have SMTP, you have POP for email, you had IRC, you had all these different protocols that allowed anybody, like for instance, when you send an email, you can send an email to somebody's Hotmail account and they'll get it there, even if you send it from a Gmail account. Right. But if you have Venmo, you can't send your Venmo to PayPal. And so right. You have this thing where, because on the web, there was that little marker that said web payments and it didn't get built. And so this is reserved for future use. So we had this thing where there was a marker for it. And because that thing didn't get built out, we now have this weird world of advertising, subscription model, and very overarching large amounts of money with large cuts for trying to pay somebody on the web. And then you have Ted Nelson's idea of microcells and micropayments, which are kind of starting to come back, or to just kind of be implemented.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I feel like, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey, whoever it was that came up with PayPal, they were originally, I think, looking toward something like this. It was back in the era of eBay. And eBay was about, oh my gosh, a peer-to-peer marketplace. And then PayPal comes along. It's like, well, what if we have peer-to-peer monetary exchange instead? And they were thinking of it. And the original business plan was they would charge nothing for the service, but they'd make money on the float because they're holding the money for 3 days or doing escrow, and then they can make interest and then release it. And the banking industry came along and said, "Whoa, boys, you're taking the function of a bank, and you'd have to be. You're not a bank. You didn't apply to be a bank. You can't just do that." So they had to become this little service. I know they're big or whatever, but they weren't allowed to be a bank. And it really wasn't until blockchain that people once again entertained the notion of, oh, wait a minute, is there something else we can use besides fiat currency coming through the Fed to the bank, to the lender, to the account holder? Is there another way to accommodate kind of a much more frictionless form of monetary exchange between people?
Yeah, it's interesting to think that we have these pockets where we can reconsider what are the persistent architectures and the norms, and that we have to wait for these little clouds to part before we can actually reconsider web payments or micropayments or frictionless money systems, and that at these inflection points we're able to add new things. But the norm is that, oh no, this is just how it is. Like even just looking like at a bathroom, it's like, oh, we can't reconsider what a bathroom is.
I know. And to me, it was like the first thing. It's funny, the day I saved my first file, and the woman showing me how to use the machine said, "Now you've got to save it. It's a read-only file or a read-write file." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, it could be read-only, that all they could do is see it, or you can make it so they can edit and change your file." And I started to look at the world as, wait a minute, everything out there is read-only media, but it should all be read-write media. And I remember looking at a dollar bill and saying, look at this. This is read-only media. Why can't we write it? The only reason we can't write this media is because there's a law against it, right? If they have to make a law against it, it means that the read-only status of that medium is arbitrary. It's artificial, right? It means we could all be writing our own money. And internet people never got that, partly because they didn't want to sell out or whatever at the beginning. But then all these kids, the Zuckerbergs and everybody who did their startups and all talked about all this disruption they're going to do with their company. What kind disruption? So they're going to disrupt some little siloed industry, but run to Goldman Sachs for their good old fashioned cash to run their business and then turn it around. It's like all you're doing is reifying the New York Stock Exchange. You are the most conservative, reactionary, old school, traditional, non-disruptive businesses that there are. You know, the only way to really disrupt what's going on is the money. Right? Is when once people are using a different payment system, the whole economy changes. Because as most of us know now, our whole regular economy exists to support banking. That's why we need the GDP to go up. That's why we need the economy to grow. It's so that you can pay back investors, bankers, more money than they lent out. The pizzeria doesn't need to grow in order to supply pizza and make a healthy profit. His lenders need to grow. So once you realize that, oh, the only reason they had to really turn Facebook into this awful, evil surveillance company is because making $10 billion a year wasn't enough to satisfy 100x growth investors and banks that put money in. So once you stop using that ridiculous medium to run your company, then you can move into this more steady state thing that we're talking about. And yes, it's related, not just metaphorically, but actually to the technologies you're talking about. So instead of money being this thing, negotiations are part of a set of protocols. Everything is alive. Everything is in the moment. You don't have like a bank book sitting somewhere else, that whole thing. There's no hard drive. There's no thing. It's all out here like it's more like torrents, right? Everything is seeding everything at once in this living steady state, rather than this sort of dead stored state. Who hates that? Rich people hate that. Why? Because rich people's power is based on dead stored state. I got all this gold in the bank, right? I got it from my daddy and he got it from his daddy, you know? And it's like, well, what did you do for it? Nothing. I'm rich, you know? And those are the people that are upset, the people depending on the stasis for power.
Absolutely. Yeah. What really interests me in this is, you know, you have, let's say you have a lot of people, if you're young, a lot of times when you're young, you're interested in what's new because you are also new.
Yeah.
when you have something that's new, it's very attractive because everything in the world has the same amount of flaws, but when it's new, you just don't know what flaws there are in it yet. And so I'm really fascinated with the old, even if protocols are considered old, even though they're not very old, because I want to go, you know, one level up the fractal, right? So if we think of, you know, the web as this self-contained thing and everybody's trying to innovate on the web, they're missing out on the larger opportunity. Jump the fractal up and you get the protocols, right? And then that's where the innovation can happen. And when I talk to a lot of people, they're like, oh, protocols are really boring. I'm like, what's so interesting about a startup? If you're making something in a self-contained ecosystem and you're trying, you know, no, everyone's, I want to make the next Facebook. I want to make the next social network. And it's like, why don't you want to make and refill in the missing protocol that got marked in and never got made on the original internet? Isn't that fundamentally interesting? Isn't that changing the world, right?
Protocols are more interesting than stuff. Protocols, it's like dating, you know? It's like meeting people. It's touching antenna. I mean, protocols, it's like the Enterprise going out, you know what I mean?
It's super exploratory. It's like, I think there's this notion, and I don't know where it comes from, and maybe this is just like our zeitgeist right now, is that making something or remaking something that already exists, that everybody has an appetite for, is so much more rewarding socially because you already have these support groups and you have this money and you have investors that are going to follow on. than making something that's new that people might not care about or make fun of. Like I remember 5 years ago, I was giving my talks about alerts. So my entire speaking strategy is giving talks about alerts and how they're annoying. And I remember the first time I gave a speech on alerts, I got one of the lowest ratings at this conference because they were like, well, we don't care about alerts. And I said, you know, in a couple of years, you're going to get so many alerts that you're really going to care about it. And then you're going to want this talk. And I had to sit there speaking in front of an audience that fundamentally didn't care about what I was saying and know that I just had to practice the speech. And that where is that kind of sense of self-direction or like larger picture? Like I want people to cultivate that and say, what is out there right now and what people are talking about right now, whether it's sci-fi or Terminator or Robocop or AI or machine learning, whatever is cool, is fundamentally, it doesn't matter if it's cool or not, to be able to see the wider picture and say, wait, on a long enough time scale, what's really going to mean something? And can we work on something meaningful with depth that we're going to be able to sink our teeth into for 10 years or more? What does that mean, right? What does that feel like? Because I have a feeling that all these people running around and getting Uber Eats and getting Ubers in their like little tiny apartment, they have this sense that they're missing out on something in their lives. You can't just go down to South America, take some ayahuasca, and re-buy back the culture that you eliminated by coding. Or if you get enough money, go and build a farm to get the original code, which is seeds in the earth, and plant that program that's been around and is stable. So what do you do? Is like working on something longer term and more interesting gives this like depth to and meaning to life, and I really want to encourage people to get back to that level, because I think one of the malaises that we're experiencing right now is that we're working at the surface level. We worship on the surface people like Steve Jobs without understanding the depth behind that or the industry that they're part of. Or we look at PayPal, but we don't read books like Founders at Work, which is just a great book about how people made companies and how weird it was, right? That PayPal was really annoyed when people started to use it for eBay. They said, what is all this junk on the web? No, we want this very specific, payment system that you can pay mobile phones, pay to pay, mobile phone, tap to pay. And then they realized that, no, we can use it for eBay. But because they had these notions about what their product should be used for, they missed out. And I think if we try to assume what things will be used for and we constrain them artificially, we miss out on a lot of these opportunities.
Right. Well, that's why you're better off building protocols than platforms, because protocols are just handshakes, all different handshakes. Well, what are people going to do? Let's see, set them loose. The thing I was thinking about, there's things to watch out for, though, as we move toward this ideal of a completely democratic, protocol-driven, super fluid micropayment economy. One of them is power law dynamics. What we were surprised about online was that we'd end up with this space where anybody can publish a song, which made us think that more people would be able to make money writing songs. But what we ended up with were these power law dynamics that led to fewer people actually making money on music and many more people making music that they made no money on at all. So it's tricky, and power law dynamics don't have to enter into a system, but they can if you don't watch out for some of the kind of the positive feedback loops that happen and expand something. Something else in a completely democratized space where you wander around and everything you look at anywhere has money attached. Well, then no one really has to write for a publication anymore, which is okay because now it's all democratic. But then every article, everything you read loses context. Now there's no editorial vision. There's no buckets. Now I'm never going to look at articles I don't already want to look at because I didn't have some editor making me at least reject a piece of writing before I get to the one that I want. The New York Times, for all of its problems, there's all these wars and stuff on the front page that we don't read, but at least we know we're choosing not to read them, as opposed to this contextless universe, this a la carte universe. And finally, for me, another challenge to think about is there's a temptation to put everything on the books. And that's to make sure that everybody gets, sort of monetary compensation for what they've done. But it could get really granular to the point where I was saying this to Jaron Lanier once when he was talking about how the blockchain will let us get everything you do, all the data that's useful to every company. Now you'll be paid for it. And I was thinking about, okay, so let's say, I get out of bed on the left side 5 days a week, and then 2 days a week I get out on the right side of the bed, but it's sort of random. Now, the Serta mattress company would probably be interested in that data, right? So now I'm getting out of bed twice on the right. And so then I get like 0.002 cents every time I get out of bed on the other side because it was the atypical side. Well, eventually, if I'm going to get paid more for getting out on the other side of the bed, well, now I'm going to start to hack my own getting out of bed in the morning in order to optimize for the amount of data of valuable data I'm creating versus the unvaluable data. And it incentivizes a weird pathway through the world where if every activity is monetizable, then we're going to start thinking about every activity. Our making love, our anything is, I'm going to make love, and the way I make love is valuable to the Trojan company because they want to know how I thrust or whatever. Oh, well, now am I making love to her, or am I making money for Trojan or for myself through Trojan? So I kind of want us to be aware that there are value exchanges and energy exchanges that we may not want to monetize, that we may not want to have a metric for, that it's not, that it's possible, that I know it's important to do, and we should, because people should be getting paid for what they do, and the gig economy and the extraction of money and central currency doesn't work. But I want us to resist the temptation to consider, to think that the solution to our problem as a civilization is to get everybody paid for everything they do. The COVID crisis has taught me that I understand what an essential worker is. The people making my food, the people healing me and getting a respirator in my lungs or whatever, the people teaching my kid, getting the plumbing, the water, and there's farming. There's a few things that we actually need. And I'm thinking maybe we just pay for that, and then everything else is free, right? Because who really cares? If you want to write your article, make your conference, do your thing, have fun, and let's just pay or contribute somehow to the stuff that's actually keeping people alive. So it's just another way to think about it. But I'm really interested to see how people learn to play with money and learn to play with exchange when it doesn't have all this "in God we trust," mafia behind it, which is all it is. I mean, money means money laundering. That's what money is. It's the laundering of crime. It's all blood money. And if we move into protocols, which is not money, but is exchange, it could actually in some ways get us off money and off optimizing everything we do for those metrics, and slowly wean us from incentivizing things extrinsically rather than intrinsically.
Yeah, you bring up a thousand good points. Like a bunch of different things I was thinking of during this time, like just the idea of, let's say you're an editor and you don't have necessarily an oversight, like you're not part of, let's say, a partisan publication like the New York Times, for instance. And so how would somebody know? So then the thing was with micropayments is that you could have fractional payments. So you could have a curator, then somebody can curate and make their own website that's an aggregator. And not only would they get paid a bit for curating and amplifying your voice, especially if they found a good voice, but they could get, they could draw attention and pass through some of the payment to that article, right? And so then you're not on Medium syndicating your message with another thing and an amplifier and sharing the payment. You could do that with anything on the web. Any content on the web could suddenly be put into these other destinations that you could just go to and pass through that payment. Or just a simple, like an indie video game maker, it's not the large company that gets paid, but however much you contributed as a musician.
Right. These teams. And the thing I love about that is you can start following the money in order to see what are the so it becomes a little bit like that brain program where, okay, I'm playing this video game. I love this video game. Oh, I can see by the money flows, who did the graphics for this, follow into that person. What other games did they make?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So now there's like neighborhoods that are a reflection of the energy flow and collaboration of different people, you know,
Mhm.
and that's fun. I mean, it's transparent and scary for people who are just afraid of that shit, but it's the beginning of the group mind. It's the beginning of the actual network. Once we don't have shame about money, once we don't have shame about sex either, it would be nice. But once we don't have shame about money, which is, there's so much shame. How much did they pay you? Oh, well, like $3 or, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
what? How much did they pay you? It's like, once you can see the flows of energy, of monetary energy between people and institutions, now you have not just a path to uncover corruption, but you can see who works together on what are the neighborhoods of productivity and creativity, and that's, you know, that's priceless.
I think we would get away from the Thomas Edison model where a bunch of people make something and then one person takes all the credit, right? Because the other thing is that negates innovation in a way, because I would want to, if I were to make the new light bulb or whatever, I would want to collaborate with the people that are doing the work. Like when my company was bought by a large company, for instance, I went through and I said, well, who actually does the work? And I went all the way down the line to the lowest paid people at the company. And I said, well, you're going to get bubbled up and be able to do work at a higher level now. And we're just going to appreciate you. Because it turned out that there were so many layers of middle management that nobody actually did any work except at the very last bit. And I think that kind of radical transparency is very interesting. Like when I follow weird experimental artists on Instagram, for instance, I see that there's a photo, but they give credit to every single person involved, right? They give a clothing credit, they give a photographer credit, a stylist credit, a makeup artist credit, a scene credit, all of these different credits, the helper, right? And if you could microtransact on that just by viewing that picture or purchasing an item from that picture, getting everybody a microtransaction payment suddenly means that the makeup artist isn't necessarily, overtly paid or not paid at all.
Right.
That suddenly there's some sharing involved, and I like that. When we talk about the sharing economy, it's like, no, there's sharing the credit and the payment too, like
Right.
standing that out. You talk
But
about
to share the money like that in a non-VC way. I mean, what you're describing calls to mind for me is like, what would a place like BetaWorks look like if you went there and you worked in little groups and pods? And sure, John Borthwick, who runs the place, can be compensated for creating an environment where you can develop and meet others, where you can depend on some of his tutelage, but he's not investing the cash in it anymore. So you can still have all the things that you would have. It's like Disney, we don't want to be in the studio system because Disney's going to own everything we do, but we want to be at the Disney studios in 1965 when they had those beautiful animation buildings and everybody's getting together and collaborating. You want Bell Labs, but you don't need Bell to own it all. So you can actually get the best of both worlds. You can get that community of people working together, and you can pay for a community. It's like like God's co-working space. Like you get to go work in Santa's workshop, he doesn't own the toys, but he gets compensated too.
Yeah, it's an interesting model because I keep thinking of early on in the tech community in Portland, Oregon, there were just these wonderful people that, I'd go to maybe 5 or 6 meetup groups a week. And there were these people, a rabbi and his wife that ran this wonderful co-working space above a bank, and it was just, it was not fancy. The carpet kind of smelled a little, and it was in the recession, and we all met there almost every night. And they didn't really get compensated for it. We didn't pay to show up. We didn't pay for everybody was dirt poor. I was living under the poverty line at the time. Everybody was doing it because they loved it, not because there was money.
Right.
Everybody, did very well later and started, most people. But the couple that was starting this wonderful space, they were not taken care of by the community because there was no model for really taking care of them other than bringing them food and hugs. But if they had participation in some way in the community that they helped start, and the eventuality of all of these successful companies that came out of it. That would have been nice. I also think, we go back to sex and how important it is to normalize that, right? You have the oldest industry, which is prostitution, but we just can call it sex work instead.
Right.
Those systems, if we think about how technology works quite well in gambling and sex and all of these things, like sex isn't afraid to push the boundaries. And I think in a lot of these systems, even like Chatterbait and things like that, there's all these amazing little tiny micropayment models already built in that could be shared with like the toys that people use, right? But, or just, if you're watching a specific video on Pornhub or something, like there could be better models for creator compensation than simply how it is. And I think those places are really pushing the landscape forward. Even though they're like a little weird, and it's even hard to talk about it, because we're in a Protestant country that has kind of demonized these things as
Right.
of profiting off of the lack, right? You're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not good looking enough. You need to drink X amount in order to do this with somebody. You need to have this certain car or whatever, or you are denied these natural urges that are part of a humanistic nature. And so, making it even more interesting for people. I kind of see in a bunch of different industries these things empowering people and providing transparency. Or what we haven't talked about is on the early web, you could be anonymous. You could change your username and be a different gender if you wanted to. You could participate as a lion if you wanted to. And that right now we're tied very much to a specific real name username. But I think with crypto, you can be whatever you want. Again, you could open up multiple wallets, and that provides some interest in terms of, let's say, just whistleblowing newspapers and things like that, where it's less traceable.
Yeah, I remember when, gosh, I forgot when it was. It must have been 89 or 90. And some guy from Citibank saw me talk at a conference, and he's like, I want to talk to you about getting our banking online. And I was like, you mean on the internet? You're going to put real money on the internet? Because I knew how easy, at that time anyway, how easy the internet was to hack and stuff. I'm like, are you serious? I mean, they didn't have SSL or whatever, security and stuff didn't quite exist the same way. I mean, you could have, a Unix partition that they can't get to, but even the best sysops would get hacked. And it was just like, it was so serious. It was like, oh my gosh. And then once you have that, then we can't be anonymous anymore. We can't play. You can't break into systems because now there's real money in there. So I can't hack anymore. Oh no. And maybe, just maybe that a new kind of money system that's sort of more native to the interactive, to the digital space would make it so that, oh, now you can still have money out there, but we could play again. We don't have to worry about, oh my God.
Or we talk about it like an old money system, right? Like I think a lot of the future is actually in the past. Like people talk constantly about, let's make a new version of government. I'm like, well, like you guys won't even sit down for a house meeting to figure out who cleans the dishes. Like, how could you make a new governance structure? Like you don't even want, like you want a new thing, but you don't want to clean up after it's, yeah. But a really good governance structure is like a forest, which automatically sheds leaves that provides room for new growth, right? It's a self-cleaning ecosystem, right? There's a role for every single microbe in the soil. It's not dirt, it's soil, right? That there are entire generations and thousands of years of history of people around the world that have understood how to collaborate with each other and survive. And it's typically in harmony with nature. It's not about this, the idea even of money to begin with, that initially you might have some grain that you were storing, but now you have the permanent abstraction of value that doesn't decay or can artificially decay based on whether somebody has a philosophy about whether your country is doing well or not and devaluing a currency. It's very strange how distended and abstract and extruded it's become from reality. You go to Spain and you have people like having fun and eating food with each other for hours and really living life in these small micro moments, these little joys, right? Not the idea of saving up all of your time from a salary job and then going to Hawaii for a week and saying, I'm going to compress all the joy in my life into this 1 week time period that I have worked strenuously for, versus you have just these small moments that are special, right? Where you're eating food and you're cleaning it up and you're having some friends over, and not every moment has to be the most epic moment, right? This is the kind of American thing that everything has to be the best, the most epic, the coolest, right? It's the, versus, things can be kind of straightforward, and that there's these joys in these small moments. And I think this period in time in our history can allow us to ask these questions again, that we've kind of shoved away. And I think I have a lot of hope for this, that we have people finally interested again in the protocol levels and things like that.
I mean, we've got both the newfound interest and readiness to experiment, and we've got now the urgent need to actually do it. We understand that a growth-based economy is going to destroy the planet for human sustenance. It can't do it. We can't grow, and we don't have to grow in order to get all the things that people want in real time. So, changing the way we exchange value, and making it work in a way that's consonant with living things, instead of to the detriment of living things. We stand a chance of making it through.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's not even a partisan notion about nature, right? It's really the idea that nature has originally given us everything for free. Like, all you have to do is put in some work and work alongside it, and then you get way more than you put out. It's like the most ultimate multiplier. And I wanted to write an article for, very conservative companies, like, if you invest in nature as your investment strategy, the returns are exponential in a way that you wanted to begin with, but you forgot that here's this free thing that's already a working ecosystem that you can just put things into. Like, you could make a wetland, and then that would soften the blow of a hurricane, and that doing that would actually make a lot of money and provide a lot of jobs. It's not about nature is good, humans are bad, humans are good, nature is bad, or mother nature, any of these gendered notions of nature. Nature is just nature, it's all genders. And
right.
So, it's this strange thing, when I talk to companies around the world, they say, shh, don't tell anyone, what we're investing in renewables. I'm like, well, what about not renewables, but restoratives? Just, that hopefully will snap back from this. And I think even having a discussion about currency is a good first step, because then, you could micropay somebody that puts oysters in the Hudson Bay, which will help ward off hurricanes, right? That there's now these equations that can be written that say, like, oh, well, here you go,
Right.
and you can exchange, right? However many oysters you put in, you can eat them.
Right.
There's a whole economy that comes through.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the beauty of moving into what we would call a cybernetic age, that we start recognizing the feedback and iteration that happens everywhere with everything, and that's certainly what we understand now about nature, that these are feedback loops, these are feedback systems. And now maybe if we have a way of working with money that is circular, that is a feedback loop rather than a unidirectional extractive, vector, then we stand a chance of having an economy that works in concert with and supporting nature, rather than extracting its value and leaving it out to dry.
Yeah, because we are nature. We're not this hubris that we're outside of animals and nature is pretty hilarious. Like, we are made of millions of microbes and microorganisms that are constantly exchanging value. And the question is, like, are we even real as humans, or are we just these walking microorganism architectures that they're renting space on us and we're condos for them? Then at a larger point, are we just termites in little soft creatures that drive around in cars, and like,
if even that,
where are we on that team?
Exactly. We spend a whole lot of energy and denial trying to maintain the illusion of our own authority over what's going on here. And we will be reminded one way or another that, we are not in charge here.
Mhm. Well, that seems like a reasonable place to leave off. Thanks so much for being with us here today. I know that everybody's had a chance since this was pre-recorded to chat, and we hope that some of the breakouts later we can discuss more about this. And if you want to learn more about Doug, you can go to rushkoff.com, right?
Yeah.
And read, let's see, one of 20 or 22 books that you've
Yeah. The
written.
one that these folks would be most interested in is probably Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, how growth became the enemy of prosperity. And really what I'm looking towards in that book is what I'm calling digital distributism, is that superfluid real-time economy that you're all after.
More like water than like concrete, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much for being here today. It was awesome. It's been awesome to follow you for the past, well, I think since I was like 12, I've been following your work. So it's a real honor, and I look forward to seeing what you write next. You have a Medium blog and other things that we can look at. And thanks again for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for being you.